and new order giants, if you like, where for a country to actually move and compete in this world that we're moving into, you do need to rely on the resources and the technology that IBM basically has to offer. But for the listeners out there, what the Hollerith machine was basically, you could call it the first computer in a sense. So it was a tabulating machine, and what it allowed the Nazi Germany to basically, at a rate of 36,000 cards per hour, would be to actually isolate, let's say, for example, people that might be, coin dealers in one particular city, and then we could also basically find out, out of that group who are actually homosexual. So what the Hollerith machine basically did, it provided the Nazi regime the capacity to obviously filter data, quantify it, and then obviously once they had that data presented to themselves, they could then obviously action it. So it wasn't a case of, the Gestapo just turned up to everyone's door on a particular day and meted them out to, whether it's the gas chambers and the like. And it wasn't only the Jews. I mean, you had, there were a lot of other marginal races out there that were obviously, if you were, if you didn't fit the mold, you were basically on the hit list regardless. So
the mechanism, the actual machine, allowed them to catalogue or inventory everybody there was by race, nationality, language they spoke, religious group, whatever characteristics they chose to catalogue was on their card, and then they could simply program the Hollerith machine. The Hollerith machine, and that would sort
itself out.
Spit out all the demographic that they'd asked for. In which
exactly. So the card would go through. It would basically be read by a reader in a sense, and it would then basically state, we have X amount of people who fit this particular, this particular criteria. But I mean, the Germans took it to another step. So they actually had a cow census, a livestock census. There was a horse census, and also a butter census. So when the commodity of butter in Europe was quite low, the Germans actually went out to find out who had all the butter, and it happened to be that the Danes were hoarding the butter. So what we need to understand in this day and age, where you have computers now like the IBM top of the line computer systems, they can compute trillions of computations basically. So if you had the Hollerith machine, which was, doing 36,000 processes within 1 hour, and we can now basically do trillions, I mean, the capacity for data mining is just absolutely, is mind-boggling. Now, the question then becomes is, when you have a company with this particular pedigree and this particular history, what are they going to do with the data? What are they going to do with the data? Have they turned a new leaf, and as a result of, people not having enough money, will I be able to send everyone a check to meet the bills for the month? I don't know.
Yeah. It's clearly a matter of what's being done with this technology. I don't think anybody's missing the similarities between what's happened in Nazi Germany, for instance, and what's happening now. We are all being catalogued. The whole core agenda of the RFID movement, if you like, is to attach something to you, which means you no longer have the power to consent to that identity. It's implanted in you. Once that's in place, then you just become another commodity then. And the degree to which these things are interactive now is mind-boggling. Devices such as the brain, what was it? The brain pacemaker was one of the things I came across, which is so sophisticated now it can tell when you're having a bad thought about the government and administer a sedative.
It's wild.
It's an offspring of the diabetics.
And that's where it's moving. I mean, we're moving now to, there is a lot of quackery as well in the system. So, for example, you'll have FRMI, which is functional, magnetic resonance, which will actually start taking maps of people's brains, basically, and then you'll have these experts that will say, look, what we can say is this particular model of this particular brain lends itself towards being a person that is not subservient. He will question authority. So then you're on the slippery slope of, what is pre-crime and what is thought crime. So we're moving into a George Orwell world where people will, they're saying this sort of information is bulletproof. This, the foundation of it cannot obviously be disputed because it's done by experts in the field with peer-reviewed journals, and we know where those leads. I mean, look at the ClimateGate scandal. But this is the problem. The technology now is getting to a point that it is so above the average person on the street that, what would happen if, for example, you took someone who was going through a particular checkpoint and they said, look, you have malintention. Your scan that we've come up, whether you're utilizing a brain-computer interface device or using fMRI or other key indicators. The point is the power is shifting to these military-industrial complex companies to the point where you don't even have a position, because how can one defend themselves on a crime that they have not committed in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, when it gets to the point where they can call an airstrike in on you because they can tell you're in a bad mood, we're in trouble, aren't we?
It's insane. And I mean, when you went back to the German incidents and, how we can actually see, a lot of the template unfolding currently of what actually happened in Nazi Germany, there was a release probably about 2 months ago where the German ministry basically decided they were actually going to roll out an ID card which will go to every single citizen. I think it was on the 1st of November, which would obviously have, an RFID chip. Now, once that particular card is actually registered with the government, you will then be able to, or be authorized, if you like, to actually do online shopping. You'll be considered a safe citizen, and you'll be able to download the music. And, one of the most important things that they brought up was that you will be able to interact with, your government officials without them worrying that you are a terrorist, right? So for me, I think to myself, when Germany can actually be roped into situations like that, I just shake my head, because I think, like, for God's sakes, I mean, you guys went through, the Nazi era. Didn't we learn anything of all countries?
It's looking very much like the only thing anybody learned was that the Germans learned to do it sneakily next time instead of coming at us head on.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's the only thing that's actually changed. It's the same agenda, but just sugar-coated with arsenic. It's just you have to take the pill before you hit the arsenic.
Yeah, there's a broad acceptance over here that the European Union's turning out to be nothing more than what Adolf wanted to impose on us anyway, so we won the war but lost in the long run.
I've got a question for Greg, if you don't mind me butting into you two there.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got two actually, which you might want to elaborate on either or both or whatever are your thoughts. I mean, what do you say when obviously you would find people that would say, look, do you not think this is a bit too much paranoia? Do you think, because they're never going to be able to chip enough of the population. You must get that. So I'm just wondering what your take is when you ask that. And
absolutely.
And the other thing I was going to ask you that you might want to touch on is the nanotechnology issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, to go back a stage, I can actually see where this whole thing is, let's say, unfolding. And I guess the reason for that is I have actually worked for companies such as Apple. I've worked for companies such as Xerox. So what we need to understand on this side, the grand plan, if you like, which is, the human microchipping, moving all finance and all commerce to a binary system where cash is actually eliminated, if you like, and the transactions will obviously move towards, obviously it'll move towards, like a touch and go, if you like, which we're starting to now see ads, bombarding, the Australian populace right now with MasterCard. It is a slow, gradual progression. So to answer the question, this agenda, for example, has been hundreds of years in the making, and especially obviously since we moved into the Industrial Revolution. If one said, the populace will be microchipped in 10 years, that's not really the case. It might not be our generation, or could be our generation, but obviously a bit further down. But what I do is I question, younger children, children which basically have just got their phones, have been born into a world of the internet, think that location-based advertising or location-based services, for example, with Twitter and the like, and they say, this is where I'm at this bar. I mean, maybe not a kid being at a bar, but what we need to see is we need to take snapshots of what was happening in the 80s, what was happening in the 90s, and what is happening here. And being realistic, the internet was really only birthed in the 90s for the, the general populace out there. And it didn't really kick off until, probably 2000, once obviously your bandwidth increased and the download speeds increased. So we are being pushed online, and it is happening extremely quickly. Like, if you actually consider within 20 years we went from a place where no one was on the internet to the point where now we're quite comfortable in doing online banking, that people are quite happy to adopt, PayPass, where you basically, tap and go in regards to your purchases utilizing RFID. We have countries in Europe, for example, and quite often it is, the lower demographic, not lower demographic, but the lower GDP countries are now starting to introduce biometric ATMs. So what we need to see as a populace is that the measures that they put in place are never it's never the final measure. So, for example, you give one fingerprint, that fingerprint will obviously fail. All the biometrics are designed to fail. So they're all designed so they can be cloned, and then they move to the next stage. So you might have one biometric, then you'll have a multimodal biometric, which means, two biometrics at the same time. And then those two biometrics will need to be merged into an RFID identity card, for example. And then that RFID identity card might have to actually be read when you go to an internet cafe, so we can actually validate that the person is that person. And then eventually it'll get to the point where you're on the internet, we need to prove who you are because of cyber terrorism and the like. So we need to merge your IP that you have on that machine to your person, which might require a retina scan, which would actually come off your PC from, your cam, basically. So the point behind it is, it does sound absolutely like, I will sometimes be driving around and I'll have these thoughts, and, I'll see certain demographics of people and I just go, there's no way that guy or that family will possibly get microchipped. But the point is how it'll actually be brought into place is very similar to how things are occurring now. So, for example, I'm going off to business in the States in about 2 weeks, and there is a visa waiver program, for example. Now, for me to enter into the United States, I have to basically fulfill the requirements for the visa waiver program. So it'll be very much a constriction of what you want to do or what you can do, and if you want to start functioning in society. And it'll just be an elimination of one particular item that we might be used to using, and there'll be an introduction of another one. And unfortunately, the youth will be the ones that will obviously adopt the new technology. And, 40 years from now, I mean, the average person out there would actually be absolutely stunned as to what the next generation will accept compared to what we will accept. So I will probably be that old bastard sitting on a chair going, you guys are crazy, like, what are you doing? And hopefully I would have raised my son well enough that,